The case of Jessica Paget. Jessica was born on December 15, 1980, in Pennsylvania, where she spent her entire life. As a child, she was energetic and cheerful. However, her parents, Thomas and Danelle, divorced when she was young. Her mother later remarried, and Jessica formed a close bond with her stepfather, whom she considered her second father. After graduating from high school in 1998, Jessica attended college to study preschool education. It was during this time that she met her future husband, Michael Paget. They began dating, moved in together, and had 2 children over the course of their 8-year relationship. Although they didn't get married until August 2014, Michael was a caring father and husband. However, like any family, they experienced ups and downs in their relationship. Jessica was happy with Michael, but just 4 months after their wedding, she vanished. Before her disappearance, Jessica worked at a kindergarten in Northampton for 2 years. She loved her job as she was passionate about working with children and had a natural ability to connect with them. The children adored her and she enjoyed spending time with them. On November 21st, Jessica dropped off her older children at school and then headed to work with her younger son, who attended the same kindergarten. It was a typical day, with no indication of the trouble that was to come. Jessica asked her administrator if she could take a short break from work to send a fax to her mother's house in a rural area near Northampton. The administrator agreed, and Jessica left her son at kindergarten before driving to her mother's house. She was expected to return to work within 30 minutes, but an hour passed and she didn't come back. Her colleagues tried calling her, but she didn't answer. When Jessica failed to return, the kindergarten administrator contacted her husband, Michael, to ask if he knew where she was. Michael said he was at work and hadn't heard from her. He tried calling her, but all his calls went straight to voicemail, which was unusual for Jessica as she always answered calls from her family. Michael then called his mother-in-law, Danelle, who was in Florida, to see if Jessica had contacted her. However, Danelle hadn't heard from her daughter all day and was immediately worried. She suggested that Michael call her husband, Greg, who was Jessica's stepfather, to see if he had any information. However, Greg reported that he hadn't seen or spoken to Jessica that day. As the minutes ticked by, Jessica's relatives grew increasingly worried. After numerous failed attempts to contact her, Danelle took a flight to Pennsylvania to search for her daughter. Meanwhile, for hours after Jessica disappeared from work, her husband Michael reported her missing to the police. He expressed his concern that Jessica would never leave their children voluntarily, leading him to fear the worst. The police promptly launched an investigation distributing Jessica's description to all nearby stations. She was described as 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighing 130 pounds, with a footprint tattoo on her shoulder, brown hair, and hazel eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing gray sweatpants and a black hoodie with the words "Duck, Duck, Goose" on the front and "Staff" on the back. A thorough search of local hospitals and morgues yielded no results. Detectives worked to determine Jessica's whereabouts, interviewing her co-workers in the process. However, everyone they spoke to reported that Jessica had no enemies and was well-liked by her colleagues, children, and their parents. According to her co-workers, Jessica seemed fine when she left work at lunchtime and they noticed nothing unusual about her behavior. 2 hours after Michael reported his wife Jessica missing, the police were able to locate her phone signal, which indicated that it was approximately 1 mile from the kindergarten where she worked. Although the data was not entirely accurate due to inherent location determination errors, it provided a general area for the police to focus their search. However, by the time they began searching, it was already nighttime. The police found Jessica's car, a white Subaru Outback, in a nearby parking lot. The vehicle was unlocked and empty, with her purse, documents, and bank card still inside. The keys were in the ignition, and her phone was on the passenger seat next to her purse. There were no signs of a crime in the car, leaving the police with several unanswered questions. Where was Jessica, and what had caused her to abandon her car and valuables so close to her workplace? To answer these questions, the police sought CCTV footage. A camera on the back wall of a store across the street had captured the area where Jessica's car was found. After reviewing the footage with the store manager, The police saw Jessica driving into the parking lot at around 1 p.m. She got out of the car and stood by the driver's door for a short time before leaving and not returning. The investigators were baffled by Jessica's disappearance, as she had left behind her documents, phone, and keys. It was unclear whether she had intentionally gone into hiding. Surveillance footage showed Jessica walking between two buildings towards another parking lot, where she vanished from view due to the lack of cameras. To get a better look at the footage, the investigators made a copy of the video to review on a larger screen at the police station. The Northampton Police Department, being a small force, enlisted the help of the Pennsylvania State Police to coordinate a search effort. Flyers with Jessica's photo were distributed throughout Northampton and surrounding cities, as well as shared on social media and through local news outlets. State police detectives began reconstructing the events leading up to Jessica's disappearance. They started by re-interviewing the kindergarten staff, who revealed that Jessica had left work to send a fax from her mother's house. The detectives then visited the house, which was approximately 4 miles from the kindergarten, in search of answers. The detectives met with Danelle and her husband Greg at the scene and learned that Jessica had keys to their home and could visit at any time. On the day of her disappearance, both Danelle and Greg had been out, Danelle in Florida and Greg elsewhere, which left uncertainty about Jessica's activities at the house. They also checked Greg's fax machine for records of usage but found that the device was faulty, which didn't provide any clear information. Jessica might have used another fax machine, but it still didn't explain why she had left her belongings in her car. The detectives decided to speak with Jessica's husband Michael, as husbands are often suspects in such cases. To confirm Michael's story that he was the first to leave the house on the day Jessica disappeared, detectives investigated his claim. It was a possibility they couldn't rule out, as statistically, a significant number of disappearances involve a partner. As they continued the investigation, the police arranged a search party, and local media alerted the public about Jessica's disappearance. Anyone with information was asked to come forward. By this point, 48 hours had passed, but no new leads emerged on Jessica's journey to her mother's house. To bait in their investigation, detectives scoured the route to her mother's house for surveillance cameras. One key location, an Exxon gas station adjacent to the main road leading to the mother's residence, had multiple cameras installed. Given the fact that this gas station was strategically situated on Jessica's stated route, the police logically inferred that if Jessica drove in the direction she said, she would be captured on camera. A review of the recording showed that her car was, indeed, captured driving by at approximately 12:56 p.m. From there, the journey to her mother's house took just a few minutes, suggesting Jessica would need to make the short trip back in order to utilize a functional fax machine, which wasn't operational at her mother's home. While fast-forwarding the tape to find a shot of the vehicle's potential return, detectives made a perplexing observation. The footage shows Jessica's white car speeding through a gas station just 14 minutes later. Notably, the car took a peculiar route, turning towards the gas station and continuing onto the other side without stopping, before heading towards the city center, where the car was later abandoned in a parking lot. Given her rapid pace, the likely reason for this unusual detour was a red traffic light at the intersection, which Jessica may have attempted to avoid by cutting through the gas station. From there, she drove onto a different road where the light was green and eventually left her car in the parking lot, where a police officer discovered it later. However, a surprising detail emerged upon closer inspection of the footage. Jessica, who was 5 feet, 4 inches tall and 130 pounds, appeared to be much shorter and lighter than the person seen exiting her car. Measuring against the known height of the car, experts estimated that this person stood between 5 feet 11 inches and 6 feet 3 inches tall. Moreover, during their examination of the abandoned car, the police noticed that the driver's seat was pushed forward, which would make it uncomfortable for someone taller than 5 feet 11 inches to operate the vehicle comfortably. The police initially found it suspicious that the driver's seat was positioned for someone of Jessica's height. However, after reviewing the footage, they discovered that the person who got out of the car had adjusted the seat to its most forward position, attempting to make it seem like Jessica was driving. But this raised another question. Who was the tall person seen in the footage? Michael, he stood at around 6 feet tall. The police brought him in for questioning, and he denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance, claiming he was at work when the kindergarten staff called him. Detectives verified his alibi by interviewing his colleagues and tracking the geolocation of his phone on the day of Jessica's disappearance. The evidence confirmed that Michael was indeed at work at the time, which meant the person in the footage was not him. For days had passed since Jessica's disappearance, and her children were struggling to cope with the stress and uncertainty. Despite the ongoing search efforts, no leads had been found. Investigators re-examined the footage of someone exiting Jessica's car, but the person's identity remained a mystery. However, upon closer inspection, the officers noticed a detail they had previously missed. A minute after the unknown person disappeared from view, a white SUV, likely a Ford, left the scene. This new information led the police to Greg, Jessica's stepfather, who matched the suspect's height description and owned a similar vehicle. The police requested that Greg come to the station for questioning, leaving him shocked and dismayed to be considered a suspect in his stepdaughter's disappearance. Greg claimed that he had left his car at a service center for repairs and that a neighbor had given him a ride there to pick it up. He then stated that he had stopped at an Exxon gas station to grab a bite to eat. However, the police obtained CCTV footage from the gas station which showed Greg driving past the station just 2 minutes after leaving the service center. Turned out that Greg had lied about stopping at the gas station. Further investigation revealed that Greg's entire story was fabricated. His neighbor denied driving him to the service center, contradicting Greg's claim. This led detectives to suspect that Greg might have been involved in Jessica's disappearance. By piecing together the evidence, investigators concluded that Greg was likely at home when Jessica arrived. It's possible that something happened and Greg drove Jessica's car to a parking lot in the city center. The police searched Greg's house, where they found evidence that contradicted his alibi. The fax machine, which Greg claimed was not working, was found to be functional, and its usage history showed that Jessica had indeed sent a fax from the house on the day of her disappearance. Furthermore, a trash can in the basement contained napkins with bloodstains, and Greg's shoes, which were found in a dumpster on the street, had dried blood on them. Daniel reported to the police that Greg had requested an early trash pickup the day before, which seemed unusual at the time, especially since the trash can wasn't full. In hindsight, this could be how Greg disposed of evidence related to cleaning products and rags used in the house. During a second interrogation, the police confronted Greg, stating that they knew his previous statements were false and that they had found evidence in his home. They also informed him that they were aware Jessica had been at his house on the day she disappeared. Greg then began to talk. Greg claimed that when he returned home on the afternoon of November 21st, he found Jessica's car in the driveway and bloodstains on the carpet. He alleged that Jessica was already dead when he arrived and that he panicked, fearing no one would believe him. He supposedly drove Jessica's car to a city center parking lot and then returned home. Greg also stated that Jessica had outstanding debts, which he claimed led to her death. However, detectives later discovered that this was another lie, and they found evidence that Greg had purchased adult toys the day before Jessica disappeared. The investigators were fed up with Greg's inconsistent stories, so they directly asked him where he had hidden his stepdaughter Jessica's body, explaining that an autopsy would provide answers to many questions. Realizing he was caught, Greg changed his story again. This time, he claimed he was at home watching adult videos when Jessica arrived and asked to send a fax. According to Greg, he was standing behind her as she used the computer, and he became aroused and developed a desire for his stepdaughter. Without saying a word, he allegedly pulled out a gun and shot her in the back of the head. Then, he moved Jessica's body to the bedroom. Greg then drove Jessica's car to a parking lot in the city center, where he had previously left his Ford for repairs. To mislead investigators, he adjusted the seat to make it appear as though Jessica was driving. What Greg said next shocked the investigators. After returning home, he set up a video camera near the bed and recorded a video of himself with Jessica's body. The police later found this disturbing video on Greg's computer. Greg confessed to wrapping his stepdaughter Jessica's body in a blanket and hiding it in a ravine near his home. He claimed he was not a bad person but had lost control. After the crime, Greg's life fell apart. He lost his business, home, dogs, and wife. However, he never mentioned the loss of Jessica. Jessica's mother, Danelle, was shocked to discover that her daughter was dead and that her husband was responsible. The authorities announced Jessica's death, stating that she was a victim of homicide. The district attorney, John Morganelli, expressed skepticism about Greg's version of events, but believed there was a sexual motive behind the crime. The prosecutor's office examined the evidence to determine if Greg had planned the attack. Jessica's family released a statement thanking law enforcement, the media, and the public for their efforts. They described Jessica as a beautiful and vibrant young woman who was loved by her family and friends and stated that her loss made the world a darker place. Gregory Gregg, 53, was charged with the murder of Jessica Pettit. Initially, investigators suspected that Greg had tried to persuade Jessica into a romantic encounter, but when she refused, he killed her to avoid exposure. However, this theory was difficult to prove due to the lack of defensive wounds on Jessica's body. She died from a single wound to the back of her head, which corroborated Greg's testimony. Under Pennsylvania law, Greg could have faced the death penalty, but since Jessica was already dead when he committed the second part of the crime, the prosecution could not pursue the death penalty. An examination of Greg and Jessica's computers and phones revealed no evidence of a relationship beyond that of stepfather and stepdaughter. The trial began in 2015. District Attorney John Morganelli noted that Greg's lawyer, John McMahon Jr., failed to submit the results of a mental health evaluation for Greg. McMahon claimed that Greg evaluated for a possible insanity defense, but the evaluation found that Greg did not have a diminished mental capacity, so McMahon did not use it in the trial. During the trial, the jury was forced to watch a disturbing 6-minute video that Greg had recorded, which showed him committing heinous crimes using adult toys he had purchased the day before. The jury was reluctant to view the video, but the judge ruled that they were obligated to watch it before reaching a verdict. Greg's lawyer argued that the crime was not premeditated and that his client should be charged with a third-degree crime rather than a first-degree crime. In response, Northampton County District Attorney John Morganelli presented the video as evidence to prove that the crime was, in fact, premeditated. Morganelli explained that this was necessary to convince the jurors of Greg's guilt, despite the disturbing nature of the footage. The jury delivered a unanimous verdict in just 6 minutes, finding Gregory Gregg guilty of taking Jessica's life and desecrating her body. As a result, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When asked by the judge if he had any final words, Greg simply replied, "No, sir. I'm just very sorry." Following the sentencing, the judge advised the jurors to seek counseling from a psychologist to cope with the traumatic case. Jessica's husband, Michael, spoke to reporters, expressing the difficulty of moving on without his beloved wife and raising their 3 children alone. He described Jessica as the most wonderful person he had ever met. In a separate matter, Danelle, Greg's wife, has initiated divorce proceedings. However, the process is proving to be complex and Greg is hindering her efforts. Today's case will take us to Opelika, a city located in the east-central part of the state of Alabama. It is the capital city of the county of Lee and boasts a population of more than 30,000 people. Opelika is famous for the Robert Trent Jones Grand National Golf Course, which has been the venue for several national and other important golf competitions. Apart from this, the city is also popular for its vibrant art scene, historic downtown area, and other scenic tourist spots. Amore was born in Virginia on the 1st of January 2006 to parents Sherry Wiggins and Lamar Vickerstaff. At the time of her birth, her mother Sherry was only 20. Lamar, on the other hand, was in his mid-30s and was a military man serving with the Navy. She was a blessing. She was smart and she was special, and that's why I named her Amore, which in Spanish means love, Sherry said of her daughter. Soon after Amoria came into the world, Sherry's and Lamar's relationship took a hit. Something that made matters worse was the fact that Lamar's relatives had frowned on his romance with Sherry from the start. And when their affair eventually produced a child, they had more cause to be displeased. They were simply disappointed that Lamar now had a child out of wedlock. With the growing tension, Sherry had no other choice but to take Amore and move out of the apartment she and Lamar shared. This was in 2006. She began to take care of her daughter on her own and got little to no help from Lamar with maintaining their daughter's well-being. Shortly after this, Lamar got married to another woman and moved on with his life. Sherry was hurt and decided to drag Lamar to court in order to at least get child support from him for Amore. But things didn't go as planned. Sherry had some legal troubles of her own, and this proved to be her undoing. At that time, I was making some bad decisions and some bad choices in my life where I did have some run-ins with the law. Due to this, the court system labeled her as unstable and decided that Amore would be better off in the care of Lamar. In addition to this, the court also directed Sherry to begin paying child support to Lamar since he was to begin caring for Amore. And so in 2009, when Amore was about 3 years old, she permanently went to live with her father and his wife, Ruth. It did make sense for her to be somewhere more stable, Sherry said. Even though Amore had been taken away from her custody, she ensured that she played an active role in the little girl's life and would occasionally visit her at Lamar's residence. However, this soon came to an end. Lamar was transferred to Hawaii by the Navy, and he had to move there with his family. Due to this, Amore was now even farther away from her mother. Sherry was saddened by this unexpected occurrence, and over the years she went to court to try and regain custody of Amore, but it was all to no avail. At some point, she was told she could no longer appeal the case, and this meant that Amore would continue to remain in the care of her father till she turned 18. I felt like they made me feel so bad about myself. I kept trying and the doors kept being closed. I felt like the best I could do was live out my financial obligation, which I never stopped. I felt like one day I could tell her, I never gave up on you, and all I could do was take care of you financially, and that is what I did. If I couldn't do anything, I could care for my daughter by supporting my child financially, Sherry said. Despite how everything turned out, Sherry kept hoping that one day she would see her child again. But sadly, this would never happen. At around 10:47 a.m. on January 28, 2012, the Opelika Police Department received a call from a resident of a mobile home community located at 1775 Hurst Street in Opelika, Alabama. The call was about a discovery that was strange and disturbing. The skull of a human being had been found outdoors. Police officers quickly jumped into their vehicles and made their way to the scene. When they got there, they were met by the person who had placed the emergency call. The individual was a woman named Yvonne Johnson, and she wasted no time in explaining to the officers that her son had been the one who found the skull in their backyard. According to Yvonne, the skull had not been there a day before, and its sudden appearance had been startling. After she told them this, she led officers to the back of the MOA home to see for themselves, and true enough, lying on the ground in plain sight was a skull. It was quite small, and they could tell by just looking at it that it was a child's. In addition to this, officers also noticed that it had a few strands of hair on it. Its presence there was odd, and officers could not help but wonder where the rest of the body was. The area was quickly secured and detectives were notified. When they got to the scene, they immediately did a sweep of the mobile home community. The aim of this was to see if they could find any more skeletal remains, but nothing turned up. With the day getting dark, detectives were forced to give up their search for the day. It wasn't until 2 days after the shocking discovery that detectives were able to locate some human remains. These were found in the woods, several feet away from where the skull had been found. Detectives also found a pink long-sleeved shirt with ruffles and heart-shaped buttons alongside the remains. All of these were collected and then sent to the lab for forensic analysis. Finding out the identity of the child shot to the top of the list of priorities for the detectives. Forensic analysis and autopsies were performed on the remains at an FBI laboratory located in Quantico. There it was discovered that it belonged to a black female, and she was speculated to have died between 2010 and 2011. Her age was estimated to be between 4 and 7 years old, and in addition to this, the medical examination also revealed something chilling. The deceased girl had previously suffered several broken bones that were already healing before she died. Her bones also indicated that she had been malnourished while alive. That was not all. A fracture was also noticed in her left eye socket, and this made detectives believe that she had been blind in the left eye. They speculated that this facial deformity would have been obvious to anyone while she was alive. In the end, Her death was ruled a homicide and detectives immediately began an investigation. They had no idea who she was, but they were determined to uncover her identity. Since they could not tell what name she had been given, they decided to call her Opelika Baby Jane Doe. Since that day, Baby Jane has been part of our OPD family, said Opelika Police Chief Shane Healy. One of the first things detectives tried to do was develop a DNA profile for the deceased girl. But the conditions of the remains made this impossible. When this failed, detectives began to review thousands of school and birth records, but their efforts yielded no result. There was no record of any missing child around the age of the deceased girl, and no one came forward for a long time to provide any useful information about her. Things would remain silent until 2016. That year, a forensic artist from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was able to come up with sketches of what Baby Jane might have looked like before her death. The sketches showed her dressed in a pink shirt with heart-shaped buttons. This was similar to the clothing that was found near her remains. These sketches were then released to the public with the hopes that someone would recognize her. Several weeks went by after this and nothing came up. But when they least expected, they got a very crucial piece of information from someone. This was in September 2016. The individual who came forward to provide the information had been a former Bible school teacher at a church known as the Greater Peace Baptist Church. The church was located in Opelika and was less than a 15-minute drive from where the skeletal remains had been found. According to the former Bible school teacher, she had seen a young girl back in 2011 who looked like Baby Jane. The teacher told detectives that the girl had looked slightly unkempt and had been unable to communicate fluently with other children. And because of this, she had mostly kept to herself. When asked if she remembered the girl's name, she told them that she didn't. With this information, detectives went to the church and took a look at the photographs that had been taken back in 2011. After going through several photos, they came upon the picture of the little girl that had been described by the teacher. Detectives could immediately see that her description fitted perfectly with that of Baby Jane. She had an obvious deformity in her left eye, just like they had speculated from examining Baby Jane's remains. The photos that were obtained from the church were a bit blurry, and so they had to use special software to enhance them. These photos were then released to the public. The following year, detectives employed the help of the University of South Florida to perform a procedure known as isotope testing on Baby Jane's remains. This method involves analyzing the number and type of isotopes present in a sample, which can provide information about the age, origin, and composition of materials. After the test was done, it was discovered that the deceased girl had a higher amount of lead in her system, and this indicated that she may have been raised in Alabama or somewhere in the southeast. Everybody has a certain amount of lead, and it depends on where you are raised, what type of drinking water you've had, said Opelika Police Captain Jonathan Clifton. Several months went by after this and detectives had nothing to go on. However, they never relented and were determined not to leave any stone unturned. To them, the case was like a black cloud that loomed over the community, and solving it was sure to bring a sense of fulfillment. In January 2022, the Opelika Police Department partnered with Othram Laboratories to carry out advanced DNA testing on the remains. They had not been successful in carrying out a DNA test on the bones in the past, but they believed that advances in the world of forensic science would make it possible. They were very difficult skeletal remains to actually create a profile from, especially the kind of profile that you need to do genealogy, said Kristen Middleman, Chief Development Officer at Othram Labs. The lab used a unique technique known as forensic-grade genome sequencing and was able to finally extract DNA from the remains. After doing this, the DNA was then used to build a profile for the girl, and it was then uploaded to the database. With this in place, detectives sought the help of a renowned and experienced genealogist by the name of Dr. Barbara Raventer. Over several weeks, Dr. Barbara and her team, Firebird Forensic Group, worked round the clock to try and identify close relatives of the deceased girl using the DNA profile that had been created. Their hard work eventually paid off because in October 2022, they were able to determine who the girl's father was. It was a moment of joy for detectives because they had finally made a discovery that had evaded them for more than 10 years. It was a large piece of the puzzle that had finally been resolved. As for the girl's father, He was none other than Lamar, the naval officer who fathered a child with Sherry back in 2006. Detectives would not know until later that baby Jane was actually Amore, Lamar, and Sherry's child. When detectives did a background check on Lamar, they discovered that he was still alive and was in the process of retiring from the Navy. They also found out that he was stationed in Jacksonville, and they decided to visit him there to inform him about the death of his daughter. In December 2022, detectives traveled to Naval Station Mayport in Jacksonville. They hoped that Lamar would provide them with details about his daughter. However, this ended up not being the case. After they met Lamar, he was strangely unwilling to talk about the little girl, and avoided every question thrown at him. This immediately raised suspicion in the minds of detectives, but there was nothing they could do at that point. The meeting with Lamar did not go as expected, but this did little to discourage detectives. Instead, they intensified their investigation and also discovered that Lamar had a wife, Ruth. They eventually met with her, but just like her husband, she provided no helpful information. However, she told detectives that she had no idea who Lamar's daughter was, or who the mother could have been. Detectives knew from that moment that they had to find out who the little girl's biological mother was. Dr. Barbara and her team got to work once again, and soon they were able to determine that the woman they were looking for was Sherry. It was also discovered that she was living in Maryland. Detectives traveled down there, and during the course of the meeting they had with Sherry, they got to find out a lot. She told them that she gave birth to a girl back in 2006, and she had named her Amore. However, she expressed shock upon hearing that Amore had been dead for more than a decade. She explained to detectives that she had lost custody of the child to the father Lamar, and when Lamar moved to Hawaii, she no longer had any contact with her daughter. When she had reached out to Lamar, his response had been cold, and he had warned her not to call again. During the course of all this, I would still reach out. I would reach out via email over the years, and they would block my email accounts, Sherry said. I called Lamar's number that I knew to be his, and he told me that if I called again, he would block me from his phone, she added. She continued to call, and Lamar stayed true to his words by blocking her, and at some point, he even threatened her with the police. Despite the fact that she had not laid eyes on her daughter for years, she told detectives that she continued to pay child support and had till the end of 2022. To back up her claim, she showed them documents that contained detailed information about the child support. The shock written on the faces of the detectives was quite visible after Sherry finished telling her side of the story. They could hardly believe their ears. After getting back to their base, they began to reach out to the school boards as well as clinics located in the states Lamar and Ruth had resided in after they gained custody of Amore. By doing this, they were able to discover that Amore was never enrolled in any school. There was also no record to show that the couple reported the little girl missing. This was all the confirmation they needed to know that Lamar and Ruth had something to do with her death. On January 17, 2023, the couple was arrested in Jacksonville and held at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. Lamar was charged with felony murder and Ruth with failure to report a missing child. 2 days after this, press conference was organized and Opelika Police Chief Shane provided in-depth details regarding the case. He also expressed his gratitude to all those who had contributed in one way or the other to ensure that the case got solved. The level of dedication to this case I have never seen in my entire career, to see a group of men and women come together searching for a name. Many of us said that we did not want to leave our time at this police department until we had her name. And now we do. Amore Wiggins, Shane had said. Sherry, on the other hand, remains grateful to the detectives for their dedication to the case, and she wants to see justice served. She was just a baby. They deprived her of everything. She was a child, Sherry said. At the moment, the case remains open and detectives continue to gather additional information in regards to Amore's relationship with Lamar and Ruth. Lamar's and Ruth's fate also remains to be determined. Amore certainly suffered terrible abuse and neglect before her death, but thankfully the long hand of the law has caught up with those involved in such an evil act. Case of Bianca Roberson. Bianca Roberson, born on October 17, 1998, Bianca grew up to be a remarkable individual. She excelled at Bayard Rustin High School, earning straight A's and graduating with honors. Her impressive academic record earned her a 4-year merit scholarship to Jacksonville University in Florida, where she planned to major in criminal justice and pursue her dream of becoming an FBI forensic agent. Bianca was a multi-talented young woman who had been involved in various activities throughout her life. She was a Girl Scout, a cheerleader, and a basketball player. She also had a passion for music, taking lessons in flute, violin, clarinet, and guitar. Additionally, she was an artist. Bianca lived with her mother and maternal grandmother, Josephine Perry, and was excited to experience the independence and challenges of dorm life. However, her plans were tragically cut short. On June 28, 2017, Bianca, her mother and grandmother went shopping at Walmart to prepare for her upcoming move to Florida. Bianca Roberson was tragically killed in a car accident on a road she knew well. The incident occurred just 10 minutes after she left a Walmart parking lot. Witnesses quickly called 911, and first responders rushed to the scene. Unfortunately, paramedics were unable to save Bianca, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. Initial observations suggested that Bianca's severe head injuries were caused by her car veering off the road. However, as police interviewed eyewitnesses, a crucial detail emerged. A witness reported that Bianca's car had collided with a red pickup truck, which had fled the scene without stopping. As she drove home to meet her granddaughter, Bianca's grandmother was worried about the traffic and wondered if it might be related to Bianca. However, she had no idea that the cause of the traffic jam was actually a car crash involving Bianca. When she arrived home, she was met with devastating news. 2 police officers were waiting to inform her that Bianca had been killed in the accident. For Michelle, Bianca's mother, the news was almost too much to bear. Losing a child is every parent's worst nightmare. Michelle, a nurse from Delaware County, was still grieving the loss of her 22-year-old son, ML James Rowley, who had passed away from a heart condition in 2013. She had hoped that time would ease her pain, but instead, it had only intensified with the loss of her daughter. Michelle Robertson is struggling to cope with the loss of her second child. "I'm just existing," she said, feeling lost and without purpose. Her children were her reason for getting up in the morning, and now she feels like a mom without kids. After her divorce from Rodney Robertson in 2006, they managed to put aside their differences and work together as amicable co-parents thanks to their daughter, Bianca. Michelle acknowledged that their divorce was not easy, but Bianca's presence helped to calm the tension. "Bianca didn't like it when I spoke harshly to her mother, and she would correct me," he said. Bianca's love for her family, especially her father, brought them closer together. Rodney admitted that Bianca was his favorite, and her devotion to family was inspiring. Bianca's father proudly said that his daughter was one step closer to achieving her dream of becoming an FBI forensic specialist. Bianca was excited to be on her own, but her future career was her main focus. Her hard work had paid off as she had received a 4-year merit scholarship to Jacksonville University, one of the 3 schools that had accepted her out of the 4 she had applied to. Bianca's father said she had also been accepted to Coastal Carolina and the University of Georgia. Investigators were seeking CCTV footage to confirm the initial belief that Bianca's car veered off the road after colliding with a red pickup truck. If this were the case, it would imply that Bianca's death was no accident, but rather a deliberate act that required the police to identify a perpetrator. However, the truth revealed during the investigation proved even more stunning. While awaiting the CCTV footage, a significant development in the case occurred. It was initially assumed that Bianca's death resulted from her car crashing and hitting her head. Yet, during the autopsy, forensic experts made a startling discovery. There was a bullet in Bianca's head. This revelation drastically altered the course of the investigation. What initially seemed like an accident and later a collision with a red pickup truck was revealed to be a death caused by a gunshot wound to the head. The autopsy report's findings prompted detectives to meet with Bianca's family, bringing devastating news that her death was no accident. This revelation sent shockwaves, especially for her mother, Michelle, who couldn't fathom why anyone would harm her daughter. Bianca had a close-knit relationship with those around her, and her family couldn't identify anyone who might have wished her harm. Desperate for answers, The Robertson family relied on investigators to identify the person responsible for Bianca's tragic death. Upon reviewing the security footage from the Walmart her family visited on the day of her death, detectives found no suspicious activity. The detectives closely examined the family's actions from the moment they left their cars to the time they departed the parking lot. They dismissed the possibility that someone from Walmart could have followed Bianca and shot her, as she had not argued with anyone during their visit. The family had simply shopped, loaded their purchases into Bianca's car, and left. The investigation suggested that the motive for Bianca's death might be linked to an incident that occurred while she was driving home on the highway. Bianca's mother recalled, "We packed all the bags into Bianca's car," referring to the 2009 Chevy Malibu they had purchased for her 16th birthday from CarMax. Michelle recalled that her mother had chosen the car Bianca was driving when she first got her permit. According to Michelle, Bianca's mother said that Bianca had gotten everything she wanted, but Michelle didn't think of her as spoiled. Instead, she believed Bianca was simply loved and also willing to work for the things she desired. In fact, Bianca started her first job at McDonald's when she was 15 and soon switched to a dietary aid position at the Whitehorse Village retirement community in Delaware County. Remembered that she had received a large number of letters and cards from the residents at Whitehorse Village who adored Bianca. After the police obtained traffic footage from CCTV cameras, Michelle pointed out that there were no cameras at the exact location where Bianca veered off the road. However, there was a camera about a mile away. To help illustrate the location, Michelle suggested looking at Google Maps. According to the map, Bianca lost control of her car where two lanes merged into one. When investigators reviewed the recording, they found evidence that supported the account of Bianca's encounter with the driver of the red pickup truck. The footage showed the cars traveling side by side, approaching a point where their lanes merged into one. It's possible that the conflict began when one driver failed to yield to the other. Given the tragic outcome, investigators inferred that the driver of the red pickup truck might have been the one who fired the shot. However, the poor quality of the footage made it impossible to read the pickup truck's license plates or see the driver's face. Nevertheless, from that point on, the driver of the pickup truck became the primary suspect in Bianca Roberson's death. Detectives were tasked with identifying the man, but they only had a blurry image to work with. After inquiring with Bianca's family members, it became clear that none of them knew anyone who owned a red pickup truck. The police then re-interviewed the witnesses who were present at the scene and those who had called 911. But unfortunately, none of them had caught a glimpse of the vehicle's license plate. The Bianca Roberson family has received an outpouring of support from friends, strangers, and people of all ages since Bianca's passing. A vigil was held just 2 days after her death, and many have reached out to share their stories and condolences. Bianca's family describes her as a selfless and compassionate person who always put the needs of others before her own. According to her mother, Michelle, Bianca would often take in children who were in need, even if it meant sneaking them into their home without permission. When confronted about her actions, Bianca would simply say that she wanted to help others in the same way she would want someone to help her if she were in a similar situation. This kind of empathy and kindness was evident in many aspects of Bianca's life, including the time she witnessed a car accident and immediately asked her mother if they could stop to help. A kind-hearted woman's first instinct was to invite those eating alone to join her family for dinner. In the aftermath of Bianca's car accident, investigators analyzed footage from distant cameras to determine the direction of the red pickup truck involved in the incident. To gather more details about the truck, including its brand, model, and license plate, they required higher quality footage. The police sought the public's assistance through the media, asking anyone with information about the truck to come forward. Following the accident, the pickup truck turned towards Poi Pike. To find evidence, detectives visited nearby houses and shops, searching for cameras that might have captured the truck. After an extensive search, they found a camera with good quality footage taken around 5 minutes after witnesses called 911 to report Bianca's car accident. Upon analyzing this footage, detectives saw the red pickup truck driving by shortly after the incident. The investigation continued, but the license plate of the suspect's car remained unknown, and it was unclear if the car in the footage was the same one or just a similar vehicle. However, 2 days after the incident, A new lead emerged when a woman contacted the police, claiming to have seen the car they were searching for. She also reported seeing the driver's face. She described the car as a red pickup truck that overtook her, stopped at the Poi Pike intersection, and then turned left. This information was crucial in narrowing down the search area and also revealed that the pickup truck in the footage was not the actual suspect's vehicle, but rather a similar-looking truck. Her description helped a forensic artist create a sketch of the suspect, who was identified as a white male, 25 to 35 years old, with brown hair and a stubble beard. The police released the suspects hoping someone would recognize the person and come forward. They showed the sketch to Bianca's family, but no one recognized the individual. As the investigation continued, detectives began to consider the possibility that Bianca's death was a hate crime. To gather more evidence, the police canvassed the area where the red pickup truck was last seen, visiting homes and businesses near the intersection where it turned left. They were searching for a high-quality surveillance recording that could provide answers to their questions. Their efforts paid off when a homeowner, who lived less than half a mile from the intersection, provided the police with a recording from their driveway surveillance camera. By estimating the time it would take to drive from the crime scene to the homeowner's location, the police quickly found the relevant footage. Although the new footage was of better quality than the previous one, its angle made it impossible for the police to identify the car or its driver. The police worked hard to find another recording from a closer camera, and they got lucky. Although the license plate was not visible, they were able to identify some unique features of the car. These features included a sticker on the right side window, a vertical dent on the passenger door, and damage to the hood. With these details, the police had a much better chance of finding the car. The police sought the public's help in finding the truck and its driver by offering a $5,000 reward for any information that could aid in the investigation. They were confident that someone would recognize the distinctive vehicle. 3 days after Bianca Roberson's death, a lawyer contacted the police station on behalf of a client who wanted to turn himself in, stating that his client was connected to the incident that resulted in Bianca's death. The incident occurred on a recent Wednesday at approximately 5:30 p.m. Bianca Roberson, an 18-year-old who had just graduated from Westchester Ruston High School, was driving on Route 100, a 2-lane highway, on her way to Jacksonville University. Her life was full of promise, with a loving family and a bright future ahead. As she approached the merge with Route 202, the road narrowed from 2 lanes to 1. A common merge on a southeastern Pennsylvania highway turned deadly last Wednesday when a dispute over positioning escalated into violence. Bianca Roberson was merging from 2 lanes to 1 when a man in a red pickup truck, also merging, became agitated and shot her in the head. The suspect, 28-year-old David Desper of Pennsylvania, surrendered to police with his lawyer. Although he refused to testify, he consented to a search of his home and revealed the location of his pickup truck. David was subsequently arrested and charged with Bianca Roberson's murder. The police tracked down the suspect's vehicle, a pickup truck, at a location David had previously mentioned. Unique features on the truck, such as stickers on the windows and damage to the body, made it unmistakably clear that it was the same truck involved in the crime. The investigators searched Davide's residence and found the firearm that was used to shoot and kill Bianca Roberson. Despite this major breakthrough in the case, the authorities remained baffled as to the killer's motivation. Over 800 loved ones and members of the community attended a heart-wrenching farewell ceremony at the St. Paul's Baptist Church in the suburban Westchester borough, which lies approximately 25 miles during the funeral service. Many people paid tribute to she, including her brothers, officials from her high school, the chief admissions officer from the university she was set to attend, and friends. In his eulogy, Pastor Wayne Croft Sr. drew a comparison between the shooter and 2 other infamous cases: George Zimmerman, who shot and killed Trayvon Martin, a black teenager, in Florida in 2012 and was acquitted of murder in 2013, and Michael Dunn, who shot and killed Jordan Davis, another black teenager, in Florida in 2012 after a dispute over music. Dunn was convicted and sentenced to life in prison plus 90 years. The pastor expressed the sentiment of the black community, stating that regardless of whether Bianca's murder was a result of road rage or racism, the fact remains that a brilliant young black woman's life was lost. During the trial in September 2018, David Desper was asked to explain his motive for committing the crime. Instead of providing an answer, he requested forgiveness from Bianca's family. For Bianca's parents, the thought of facing their daughter's alleged killer was daunting. To show their support and unity, Rodney had arranged for family members and friends to wear t-shirts with Bianca's face on the front as they gathered at the Chester County Government Services Center. The family of Bianca Roberson wore bracelets with a poignant message, "Bianca Roberson, a rose in God's garden." They also held a banner that read, "Justice for Bianca Nicole Roberson," a reminder of the tragic event that took her life on June 28, 2017. Rodney, Bianca's father, expressed his uncertainty about how he would react when he saw the man responsible for his daughter's murder. "I don't know what I'll do when I see him," he said. "The man who held the gun that took my daughter's life, he just took her dreams away. He had no right to do that." Michelle, Bianca's mother, struggled to come to terms with the loss of her child. "I want to hold her, comfort her, and bring her back," she said through tears. The prosecutor argued that the traffic conflict occurred because Bianca failed to yield when their lanes merged into one. In response, David Desper rolled down the passenger side window and fired a shot. Realizing the severity of his actions, David Desper fled the scene, leaving his pickup truck with a friend in Pennsylvania and attempted to escape to Delaware. However, after his sketch and the distinctive features of his pickup truck were publicized in the news, David Desper decided to hire a lawyer and surrender. The police investigated his social media accounts and interviewed his friends, but found no evidence to suggest that the crime was motivated by bias. As a result, David Desper was not charged with a hate crime. District Attorney Hogan stated that there was no indication that the crime was racially motivated or a hate crime. However, many people disagreed with this assessment. Before the sentencing, the defense portrayed David Desper as harmless and immature for his age, describing him as a big kid who enjoyed playing with cars in his free time. They argued that David Desper had essentially handed the case to the government by turning himself in. The defense claimed that David Desper was driving home when another car startled him, causing him to fire the gun. They maintained that David Desper was not a menacing individual. Prosecutor Chris Miller countered that a 28-year-old man driving with a loaded firearm is not a big kid. He emphasized that David Desper's actions were those of a responsible adult. Ironically, David Desper's own mother had shared a Facebook post about the police searching for the person who murdered Bianca Roberson, unaware that the suspect was her own son. Wendy Desper expressed her love for Bianca's family and apologized for her son's actions. "I'm so sorry for what my son did," she said, as her son wept. Rodney Robertson struggled to speak through tears as he addressed his daughter's killer. "I have simple questions for the defendant," he said. "Why did you shoot my daughter? Was it because of her youth, her race, her gender, or just because you wanted to go first on the road? Was it simply because you were having a bad day?" Rodney continued, "All my dreams for Bianca were coming true until the day the defendant took her life. Now all I have left of Bianca are my memories." David Desper pleaded guilty to third-degree murder. The court sentenced him to 40 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Judge Amore Wiggins became emotional as she announced the sentence, telling Desper, "I don't believe you were afraid. I believe it was anger." County Judge Amore Wiggins imposed the maximum sentence of 20 to 40 years for that grade of homicide. David Desper attempted to appeal the sentence, but his appeal was denied. Today's case will take us to Appleton, which is a city located north of Lake Winnebago in Wisconsin. With a population of more than 75,000 people, it is the sixth largest city in Wisconsin. Appleton is also the county seat of Outagamie County, and it is home to America's first hydroelectric central station designed by the Edison Company. The city is famous for hosting regional events such as Oktoberfest and the Mile of Music. Was born in 1928 in the small village of Port Williams, Ohio. Life in Port Williams was simple, and Betty grew up surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her. After graduating from high school, she took up odd jobs to make ends meet. She worked at various places, including a canning industry, laundry, and even a nursing home. At some point, she met Charles, a military man who was serving with the Air Force and was stationed at a base that was close to Port Williams. The two soon started a romantic relationship, and after dating for a while, Charles asked Betty to marry him. She could hardly hide her joy at the proposal and did not hesitate to say yes. After the wedding, the two moved to Appleton, Wisconsin, where they settled down and began their life together. In their new environment, the couple took up different jobs. Betty worked in the laundry department of the Country Air, a restaurant that was only 15 minutes walk from her home. That small update. Charles, on the other hand, worked as a security guard in Oshkosh, a city about 30 minutes drive from Appleton. Charles and Betty continued to live a very peaceful life, and in no time, their union was blessed with 5 children. Betty was a wonderful mother to her children, and she ensured that the bonds that existed between members of her family remained strong. She was a beautiful lady, good cook, great artist. She was a mom, Betty's daughter, Sheila Worms said of her. She was a beautiful soul and the sweetest person you could ever imagine. She had a heart of gold, Betty's granddaughter, Sue Schrenk said. Among other things, Betty also loved family gatherings and holiday get-togethers. And during these occasions, members of her family looked forward to the delicious rolls, pies, bread, and other treats she often made. Christmas time was her favorite, Sheila said. There was never a bad time with my mom. Betty was also a familiar face around the neighborhood, and most people who knew her couldn't help but love her warm personality. She was well known around the neighborhood. Even when she went shopping, everyone knew her. She walked everywhere, said Mary von Huckland, Betty's niece. The age of 60, Betty was a fulfilled mother and grandmother. At this stage of her life, she spent more time taking walks around the neighborhood, as well as sitting outside to enjoy the peace of her surroundings. For Betty, life was getting better with each passing day, and it seemed as if it would remain that way for a long time. But things took an ugly turn when she least expected it. November 1988 brought with it heavy snowfall. The residents of Appleton began to prepare for a long winter. It was the coldest time of the year, and most people preferred to remain indoors with their families. But since Betty still had to work at the Country Air restaurant, she had no choice but to venture out into the cold to get to her workplace. She could drive, but she had a fear of driving in the snow, perhaps due to how slippery the roads could get. Due to this, Charlie would often drive her to work, and when he was not around to do that, she would walk. November 6, 1988 fell on a Sunday, and it was a day Betty decided to work. She woke up refreshed and had no idea of the terrible thing that was to come later in the day. It was snowing heavily that morning, but this did not discourage her. She planned on leaving home before 6 a.m. She'd informed Charlie of her plans, and he had told her that he would not be driving her to work since he was not leaving for work until much later in the day. The only other option that was left was to trek to work, but she wasn't bothered by this since it was only 10 blocks away. After she freshened up, she wore a thick coat, grabbed a black purse, and made for the front door. When she opened it, she immediately felt the full blast of the cold wind and wet snow on her face, but her coat did a good job of keeping her warm. She then stepped outside, slammed the door shut, and headed in the direction of her workplace. That was the last time anyone would see her alive. Betty did not show up at work, nor did she return home. The day quickly went by, and at around 2 p.m., when Betty usually returned from work, Charles, her husband, began to get slightly worried. He knew she should have been back and wondered what was delaying her. After a while, he assumed that she was probably running errands. In the evening, when she had not returned, he speculated that she was at their son's place, babysitting their grandchild. But there was no way to know this for sure, since their son did not have a home phone that he could call. He did, however, reach out to other family members over the phone to ask if Betty had stopped over at their places, but much to his disappointment, he was told that she had not been seen. Charles could hardly sleep all through the night, and he kept listening for the familiar sound of his wife's footsteps approaching the house. But it never came. The next morning, he knew deep down that something terrible had happened to Betty, but he wasn't certain what it was. He knew he had to inform the police about the situation, and that was what he did. He made his way to the police station and reported that his wife was missing. This was around 10:40 a.m. At around 11 a.m., Appleton police officers entered Betty's neighborhood to search for her. They decided that the smartest thing to do was to retrace her footsteps and check the path she usually walks to her workplace. An officer started from her home and began to walk along the path she normally took. It was a cold and rather dull morning, and the ground was slippery in some parts, but the officer knew he had a duty to perform. After walking for a few minutes, he came to a railroad overpass, which was just outside the city limits on West Spencer Street. Just under the overpass was an 8-foot wall, and something told the officer to look there. He went down under the overpass, and much to his surprise, he found a woman lying there. She was wearing only a coat from the waist downward. She was naked. A purse strap was also wrapped around her neck with a single look. The officer knew that she was the woman he had set out to find. She was not breathing, and he could tell that she was dead. It was obvious that she had been that way for quite some time. One thing the officer noticed was that the body was well hidden, and passengers in passing trains would not have easily spotted it. He immediately radioed the station about the discovery, and in a matter of minutes, police vehicles and an ambulance arrived on the scene. Betty's body was placed in a body bag and taken to the Wisconsin Crime Lab for autopsy. When Betty's family were informed that she was dead, they were beyond devastated. It was a horrible and unexpected blow. I was in shock. Sue recalls of the day she got to know about her grandmother's death. Many friends and well-wishers went to offer their condolences to Betty's family after hearing of her death. She never hurt anyone. She minded her business. Carol Bailey, Betty's sister, said, "The autopsy that was carried out on Betty's body revealed that in addition to being sexually assaulted, she had been forcefully hit on the head and face with an object. And that was not all, as whoever the assaulter was had also strangled her." The forensic pathologist who performs the autopsy was able to take swabs from Betty's body. These swabs contains DNA that was left behind by her killer. However, there was a problem. It was a period where the technology to carry out DNA testing was not yet available. As a result of this, the swabs had to be safely stored away with the hopes that the future would hold better possibilities regarding DNA testing. Betty's death was ruled a homicide, and detectives immediately began their investigation to find out who had killed her. Many members of her family were interviewed over the space of several weeks, but none of these interviews helped detectives get closer to solving the case. They kept going in circles, and soon the case went cold. Meanwhile, Betty's death caused fear within her family. They had no idea who Betty's killer was. However, they suspected that it was probably a family member or someone they knew. This uncertainty did nothing but give way to distrust. It was not until September 2001, almost 13 years after Betty's murder, that DNA analysis would be performed on the swabs that were taken from her body. Detectives were able to create a DNA profile of the killer from the obtained DNA, and the profile was entered into the nationwide CODIS database. With this major milestone that was achieved, detectives knew that they were closer than ever to solving the case. The next thing they did was to begin obtaining the DNA of those connected to Betty and compare them to the DNA profile of the subject. No match was made by doing this, and this allowed members of her family to be ruled out as the killer. After this, the profile was also compared to the DNA of known offenders that were available in the database, but still no match was found. It was a frustrating period for detectives, and the glimmer of hope that they first had when the DNA profile of the suspect was developed gradually faded. Years went by after this, and the identity of Betty's killer remained a mystery. "We didn't know if this person was deceased or this person had other crimes," Sue said. By 2015, when the police was interviewed by the media, they had given up hope that Betty's killer would ever be found. "I don't think it will ever be solved," Charlie, Betty's son, had said at the time. Despite the fact that they had accepted that the killer might go unpunished for the crime, they continued to feel anger and anguish caused by Betty's murder. "There is still anger there," Charlie said. "Why would anyone take her life? The killer has no morals and no conscience," he added. Around the same time, detectives working on the case were also interviewed, and they made it known that although the case was open, it was not actively being worked upon. "Anytime we get some information, we try to follow it up." Lieutenant Terry Hammond of the Outagamie County Sheriff's Department said the time gets greater and greater between tips. After this, things once again went quiet. In 2019, detectives decided to use a whole new approach to find the subject. The tool that was employed was called familial DNA search. Familial DNA search allows the DNA profile of an unidentified person to be searched against the database. The process identifies a list of potential candidates who are closely related to the unknown DNA. Now, after detectives carried out the familial DNA search, they were able to zero in on two men. One of them was called Gene Myers, while the other was only identified by his initials, which were CM. As it turns out, the two men were blood brothers, and detectives took it upon themselves to track down the both of them. The first person they made contact with was CM. They wasted no time in explaining to him the reason why he was being investigated, and after hearing it, CM decided to fully cooperate. He was asked to provide a saliva sample, and this was sent to the Wisconsin Crime Lab for analysis. When the results came out, it showed that CM was not the man they were looking for. Since CM was no longer a suspect, the attention was now focused on his brother, Gene. Detectives then sat down with CM and asked him questions about Gene. According to what CM told them, he had not seen Gene for a long time, and because of this, he believed that his brother was dead. However, detectives discovered something important while questioning CM, and it was that back in the 1980s, Gene had been living about a mile from where Betty's body was found. With this information, detectives knew they were onto something. Detectives also tracked down a niece of Gene, and when they spoke to her, they were able to make a key finding. Gene's niece told them that back in 1988, around the time of Betty's death, Gene had called her mother, who was Gene's sister, to bid her farewell, because he was moving out of Wisconsin. After the phone call ended, she noticed that her mother was agitated, and for this reason, she asked what had happened. But her mother responded by saying that she had a secret, and it was going to the grave with her. All her effort to try and get her mother to reveal the secret did not succeed. After this revelation, detectives thanked Gene's niece for her time and decided that it was time to look for Gene himself. Since there was no record to show that he was dead, they strongly believed that he was alive and they were determined to find him. After several weeks, they eventually found him, living a peaceful and quiet life in the state of Washington. He owned a pickup truck, and his residence was about an hour south of Tacoma. Everything about him seemed pretty normal. For some reason, detectives did not approach him but instead chose to monitor him from a distance. The FBI took up the task of conducting surveillance on him. On November 21, 2022, FBI agents managed to get his DNA. An agent had walked over to his vehicle where it was packed and had taken swabs from the door handle of his truck. These swabs were then sent to the Wisconsin Crime Lab for testing. All that was left was to wait for the result. After a few weeks, the results came out and it was what the detectives had expected. The DNA profile that was developed perfectly matched that of the swab that was taken from Betty's body back in November 1988. With this, detectives knew that the case was finally solved. On December 7th, Gene was arrested by the Outagamie County Sheriff's Office, FBI, and Pierce County Sheriff's Office in Washington. At time of his arrest, he was 66 years of age. He was charged with first-degree intentional homicide and first-degree sexual assault with a weapon. After the arrest, Betty's family were contacted and given the news. They could hardly believe their ears. "We've had to sit and wonder about this every day of our life for 34 years, Betty's daughter Sheila said. "We thought the killer was going to be somebody we knew." They were also relieved that the case had been finally brought to a close and appreciated the detectives for their efforts. "Thank God for DNA testing," Sue said. "Otherwise, we would have never got him and he would have gotten away with it. Everyone's just happy he's been caught," she added. At the moment, Gene is locked up at the Pierce County Jail in Washington and will be transferred at a later date to Wisconsin where the crime occurred. Sheila hopes that justice takes its course, and that Gene gets a punishment that befits the crime he committed. "He took everything from us," she said. "My mom did not deserve this, and this never should have happened, especially not in such a cruel way like that. She was an innocent person. I want to be at the court every time Myers is there. Now they can put him where he belongs. If Gene is found guilty of the charges against him, he could face life imprisonment. There is nothing that can be done to bring back Betty. However, there is assurance that her killer will not go unpunished for what he did. The case of Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coney. This story began in 2016 in the Argentine city of Mendoza. On January 10th, two young women, 21-year-old Marina Menegazzo and 22-year-old Maria Jose Coney, embarked on a highly anticipated trip. Unfortunately, their journey ultimately led to one of the most publicized investigations in Latin America over the past decade. At the time, Maria Jose was a 22-year-old economics student at the National University of Cuyo, while Marina was a 21-year-old speech therapy student at the Aconcagua University. Both women volunteered for an organization that assisted homeless individuals. According to friends and acquaintances, they were two bright and cheerful young women who were extremely close to their families. Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coney embarked on a trip with two friends, but the group eventually parted ways. The girls continued their journey, which began on January 10th. Their route can be tracked through Maria Jose Coney's Instagram posts. On January 13th, they were in Cusco, Peru, an ancient city that was once the capital of the Inca Empire. The next day, January 14th, another photo was posted, also taken in Cusco. A subsequent image was published on January 15th, showing they on a railway bridge near the Machu Picchu hydroelectric power plant. Machu Picchu is a famous ancient Inca city, often referred to as the city above the clouds, and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Maria Jose Coney and Marina Menegazzo had about 10 days of vacation left and were in no rush to return home. They decided to revisit Montañita, the town in Ecuador where their trip had begun. On February 22nd, Maria Jose Coney posted a photo of herself with Marina Menegazzo on Instagram, which would be her last post. On the same day, they contacted their families in Argentina to let them know they would be returning soon. They planned to take a bus from Ecuador to Lima, Peru, where they would spend the night at a friend's house. From Lima, they would fly to Santiago, Chile on February 25th, and then take a bus to their hometown of Mendoza, Argentina. They informed their relatives that they would be unreachable by phone for a few days due to poor signal reception. However, when their relatives tried to contact them, they were unable to get in touch. As the days passed, there was no activity on Maria Jose Coney and Marina Menegazzo's social media accounts, causing their relatives to become increasingly worried. Marina Menegazzo's sister took to social media to raise awareness about their disappearance. She posted a photo of the girls with a message stating that they had gone missing on Monday, the 22nd, in Montañita, Ecuador, and asked people to share the information. The families were eager to know if they had left the country and boarded a flight, but their attempts to contact the airline were met with no response. The family of Maria Jose Coney and Marina Menegazzo tried to get information from they were supposed to stay with before leaving, but they claimed they never showed up. The family then reported they missing to the emergency services in Ecuador and also contacted the Argentine consulate for assistance. The Argentine consulate got involved on February 27th and sent a fingerprints to Ecuador. This was done because a few days earlier on February 25th, an unidentified woman's body was found in Montañita and taken to Guayaquil. The authorities compared the fingerprints from Argentina with those of the unidentified body and confirmed that the body was that of Maria Jose Coney. On Saturday, February 27th, police investigated the area where Maria Jose Coney's body was discovered and found the body of Marina Menegazzo, just 43 yards away. Like Marina Menegazzo's body, Maria Jose Coney's was also wrapped in a plastic bag and duct tape. According to the Ecuadorian police, the killer attempted to conceal Marina Menegazzo's body by placing an object on top of it, which initially prevented its discovery. During the autopsy, the medical expert determined that Maria Jose Coney's death was caused by severe blunt force trauma to the head. Her injuries also included a broken leg, a broken toe, and what authorities described as genital injuries. Additionally, markings on her wrists suggested that she had been restrained. Marina Menegazzo died from 6 stab wounds to the neck and had similar wrist markings, indicating that she had also been tied up. The deaths occurred on February 23rd. Toxicology tests revealed that their blood contained a high amount of a psychiatric medication. Based on the circumstances of their deaths, Police believed that they had not taken the medication voluntarily and may not have even known they had ingested it. It is likely that someone had mixed the medication into their food or drinks without their knowledge. A breakthrough in the case came just 24 hours after the discovery of the second body. The President and Interior Minister of Ecuador announced that the police had made an arrest, sparking mixed emotions among the victims' families. Alberto Segundo Mina Pan, 33, and Aurelio Eduardo Rodriguez, 39, were taken into custody and quickly confessed to the crime, revealing the events that had transpired. Physical evidence found at the home of one of the suspects, Mina Pan, included bloodstains. The police also recovered Marina's phone, backpack, and other belongings near the house. The rapid arrest and immediate confession of the men were met with skepticism by those following the case, leaving many with unanswered questions. Ecuador's Minister of the Interior, José Serrano, claimed that they checked out of their hotel room on February 22nd at 2 p.m. According to the men's story, they had their money stolen at the hotel, prompting them to hitchhike to Lima. However, the hotel owner disputed this claim, stating that there was no evidence of theft. Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Coni's families found this explanation hard to believe, particularly since they had credit cards that they could have used if they encountered financial difficulties. The lack of activity on the credit cards suggested that either someone stole both their cash and cards, or that the men's story was not true. Moreover, they could have accessed the funds in their account without needing the physical card. But they didn't use the money to book travel or accommodations online. According to Ecuador's Minister of the Interior, Marina Monaco and Maria Jose Coni's entered a bar and requested 2 glasses of water because they were thirsty and had no money. The bar owner corroborated this account, stating that she provided them with water due to their financial situation. However, it remains unclear whether their money was actually stolen. The minister continued by referencing the testimony of the suspects, who had already confessed to their guilt. One of the suspects, Pan, stated that around 8 p.m. on that day, Rodriguez informed him about 2 Argentinian girls in a bar. Pan and Rodriguez approached they and started a conversation, during which Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Coni explained that they were hitchhiking to Lima because they lacked the funds for a bus ticket. This version of events raises several questions. They had purchased plane tickets from Lima to Santiago, Chile, which is over 1,000 miles away. It seems illogical that they would try to save money by hitchhiking and risk missing their flight, which was scheduled for February 25th. This conversation with Pon allegedly took place on the evening of February 22nd, making their decision even more puzzling. However, local police found witnesses who corroborated this unusual story. Since Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Coni had no money for a hotel or hostel and needed a place to stay for the night, Pond offered to let them stay at his house. They accepted his offer. A taxi driver was found who confirmed that he drove Marina Manazzo, Maria Jose Coni, and Pond to Pond's home. This picture is of the house where Pond resided. After that, Pan returned to the bar with Rodriguez, as reported by Ecuadorian authorities, and continued drinking. Meanwhile, Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Coni were left alone in the house. The intoxicated men returned home around 2:30 a.m., but Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Coni were no longer there. The police investigation revealed that Marina Manazzo via Maria Jose Coni had visited a nearby store to purchase soda before returning to the house. A store cashier confirmed this, indicating that Marina Manazzo via Maria Jose Coni still had some money on them. According to Pond's account, when they returned to the house, he stayed in one room with Maria Jose Coni, while Rodriguez was in another room with Marina Monaco. Pond admitted that he attempted to persuade Maria Jose Coni into a romantic encounter, but she resisted and tried to leave. In a fit of rage, Pond grabbed a stick and struck Maria Jose Coni on the head, killing her instantly. At the same time, he heard a scream coming from the other room. Upon entering the room, he found that Rodriguez had also taken Marina Manigo's life. Rodriguez immediately fled the scene, leaving Pond to contemplate how to dispose of the bodies. Pond attempted to erase all evidence from the house by wrapping the bodies in plastic bags and duct tape. In the afternoon, he borrowed a cart from an acquaintance and transported the bodies to a wasteland near the ocean shore. approximately 440 yards from his home. It is essential to note that this account is the official version provided by the Ecuadorian authorities. However, this narrative leaves several questions unanswered, including the origin of the marks on her wrists and the presence of a potent drug in the blood of both girls, as revealed by toxicological analysis. Her family questioned the Ecuadorian authorities' account due to numerous inconsistencies in the case. They suspected a possible connection to human trafficking and believed the authorities might be protecting someone. The family's doubts were fueled by several factors. They had run out of money but did not use their credit cards, suggesting that they may have been coerced or deceived. Additionally, it was reported that they were under the influence of drugs, which raised suspicions about their supposed activities. Notably, the only people who claimed to have seen Marina Minato and Maria Jose Coney on the day of their disappearance were a select few who corroborated the authorities' version, including the owner of the bar, a taxi driver, and a cashier who allegedly sold soda to one of they. Furthermore, the town's relatively small population of 5,000 residents made it surprising that no one else came forward as a witness. The families of the victims were confused by several aspects of the case. They couldn't understand why the bodies were found 2 days apart despite being only 43 yards away from each other. It also seemed strange that Marina Minato via Maria Jose Coney had sought help from Pan and Rodriguez, rather than approaching one of the many Argentine tourists in the area. The brother of one of the victims reported seeing used syringes on the floor when he was taken to the crime scene by the Ecuadorian police. However, when he asked about them, the syringes mysteriously disappeared. Furthermore, the syringes were not visible in crime scene photos, and the experts who examined the area denied their existence. The family suspected that Pan and Rodriguez were involved in something more sinister, such as human trafficking, and that they were being used as a cover. The authorities responded by scheduling a second autopsy and a new toxicological examination. Additionally, it was discovered that both defendants had repeatedly changed their story about the events surrounding Marina Minato and Maria Jose Coney deaths. According to one version, Pan denied involvement in the crime and instead claimed that the perpetrator was a Venezuelan illegal substance dealer known as El Chamo, who lived in the area. However, when questioned by the police, El Chamo denied any involvement and offered to take a polygraph test or provide a DNA sample to prove his innocence. The crime scene yielded several DNA samples, including those from Pond and the deceased girls, as well as some unidentified samples. Further testing revealed that the unidentified samples did not match Rodriguez, who was suspected of being Pond's accomplice, nor El Chamo, who was ultimately ruled out as a suspect. A second autopsy, conducted by Argentine experts, revealed that the girls were in a state of vulnerability and unable to defend themselves before their deaths. The autopsy also confirmed that they were subjected to forced intimacy before being killed. The autopsy revealed additional details, including that Maria Jose Coney had bruises and scratches only on one side of her body, suggesting she may have been ejected from a moving vehicle. Furthermore, a new toxicological analysis confirmed that both girls had been given a potent psychiatric medication that can impair a person's willpower. A disturbing reaction swept across Latin America following the incident. Unfortunately, the public's response often blamed the victims, and in this case, they were held responsible for their own deaths. Not only were they criticized by ordinary internet users, but also by well-known public figures. During the same time, Berlin hosted a tourism fair where Rira gave an interview to a German news agency. Her comments were alarming, as she stated that the deaths were inevitable given the way they traveled. She also revealed that she had never visited Montanita, a popular tourist destination, because it didn't match her social status. These comments were essentially victim blaming at the state level, which is a sad and concerning fact. Following an interview with Rivadera, the Ecuadorian government issued an apology to the families of Marina Monaco and Maria Jose Coney, and one woman was fired. Among those heavily criticized was Argentine psychiatrist Hugo Narton, who described they as favorable victims and implied that they provoked others to commit crimes. However, after intense backlash, Dr. Narton claimed he had been misunderstood and emphasized that he never intended to excuse or absolve criminals of their responsibilities. A Paraguayan student, Guadalupe Aosta, wrote a Facebook post in response to online comments that blamed Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Coney for their tragic fate. The post went viral, receiving over 700,000 reposts in the first week. It began with the haunting words, "Yesterday, I was killed." The post went on to describe the violent events. "I refused to be touched, and they smashed my skull open with a stick, leaving me broken. They put me in a black plastic bag, sealed with duct tape, and threw me on the beach, where I was later found a few hours later. The aftermath of my death was more devastating than the act itself. When my body was found, no one bothered to investigate who had taken my life. Instead, I was bombarded with irrelevant and insensitive questions. What was I wearing? Why was I alone? Why did I, a woman, dare to travel by myself? I was in a high-risk area, so what did I expect? The authorities even had the audacity to suggest to my parents that I must have done something wrong, that I must have broken some rule. In death, I realized that I was not considered equal to a man. My demise was somehow my fault, and that's the narrative that would be perpetuated. But if the headlines had read, 2 young men found dead, public would have been outraged, demanding justice and severe punishment for the perpetrators. The response would have been vastly different if I were a man. I'm speaking out for myself and for all the women who have been silenced, marginalized, and oppressed. I'm speaking out for every woman who has had her dreams crushed and her life destroyed. I urge you to raise your voice to fight for justice and equality. I'll be with you in spirit, and I promise that one day there will be so many of us standing together that our voices cannot be silenced." The trial started on August 8, 2016, but was marred by several setbacks. The prosecutor changed 3 times, causing significant delays in the process. Despite these challenges, the prosecution presented a substantial amount of evidence, including witness statements and over 200 physical items collected from the crime scene. The police had found some of the victim's personal belongings, biological fluids, and phones at the house where the crime took place and in the surrounding area. During the trial, Pon maintained his innocence, claiming that his earlier confession was made under police pressure. This statement only reinforced the suspicions of the victims' families that the Ecuadorian authorities were withholding information. Meanwhile, Rodriguez altered his testimony, suggesting that Colombian dealers of illicit substances were involved in their deaths. In the trial's first week, the prosecutor revealed that he suspected additional individuals were involved in the case. This suspicion was based on the discovery of 3 more male DNA samples at the crime scene in addition to the DNA of Rodriguez and Pon. Ultimately, the court found both Pon and Rodriguez guilty, sentencing them to 40 years in prison, the maximum penalty allowed under Ecuadorian law. In November 2016, Ecuadorian authorities arrested Jose Luis Perez Castro, a 34-year-old man, after finding his DNA at the crime scene. Castro's defense team claimed that he had lived in the house a few weeks prior to the incident and that his DNA was present due to a dental infection. They alleged that he had spat blood onto the wall as a result of this infection. However, the defense's explanation for the presence of Castro's DNA on the victims' bodies was that he must have touched an object or piece of furniture that the police had also handled, thereby transferring his DNA. This argument began to fall apart when a dentist testified in court. It was revealed that Castro had contacted the dentist 2 weeks after the bodies of Marina Manazzo and Maria Jose Coney were discovered, asking for a note to confirm his alleged dental infection. The dentist refused to provide the note, as he found no evidence of any health issues during his examination of Castro. A man was ejected from a dentist's office after seeking a medical certificate. The dentist refused to issue one, explaining that there needed to be an underlying medical condition causing pain, which he didn't observe. This denial dismantled his defense. Meanwhile, while awaiting trial, Castro broke prison rules by posting on social media about his situation. In a statement, he expressed confidence that God would ultimately prove his innocence. Despite his persistent claims of innocence, Castro was ultimately found guilty and received a 40-year prison sentence, just like 2 others, Alberto Pan and Eduardo Rodriguez. This case begins in the famous city of Denver. Denver, the state capital of Colorado, is a historic American metropolis. Denver is famous for its collection of world-class museums, first-rate breweries, and historical landmarks. The Denver Art Museum, a cutting-edge facility renowned for its collection of indigenous artworks and the home of renowned Titanic survivor Molly Brown, are some of the historical landmarks that can be found around the city. Philip Peters was born in 1869, and he married Helen Peters, born in 1872, in the 1890s. In 1941, the couple were living in a small brick home located at 3335 West Moncrief Place in Denver, Colorado, and this had been their residence for the last 4 decades. Philip had served as an auditor at the Denver station for the Denver and Rio Grande Railway from 1891 until his retirement in 1930. They had one child, Philip Peter Jr., who was an adult, married, and residing in Grand Junction, Colorado. Helen and Philip were both avid music enthusiasts. Philip played the mandolin and was a member of a local Denver organization for guitarists and mandolinists who organized small concerts and practiced together. One could say that the couple led a pleasant, quiet, and modest life. Helen Peters fractured her hip in September 1941, and she had to stay in the hospital while recovering, leaving 71-year-old Philip at home alone. He visited his wife in the hospital every day, and his neighbors kept an eye on him, assisting him around the house and inviting him over for breakfast and dinner. Peter was invited for a meal at the residence of Mr. and Mrs. his neighbors from across the street. On Friday, October 17th, Peter was late on this occasion, which was unusual for him. Mrs. Ross then crossed the street to see what was delaying Peter and to make sure that everything was all right with him. When she went to the front door and saw there were no lights on inside the house, she grew worried. She knocked at the front door but got no response. She thought about breaking in, but she didn't want to do it alone. Suddenly, she saw her neighbor, Doris Burke. She immediately asked for her assistance in getting access to the house and suggested entering through the backyard. The two then climbed over the fence at the back to unlock the door. As Mrs. Ross entered the home and turned on the kitchen light, she discovered a horrifying scene. She saw gory streaks on the ground and shrieked at the sight of blood splattered up the walls. She peeked through the doorway into the front room of the house, but Philip was nowhere to be seen. When she entered the bedroom, Philip Peters was lying face down in front of her. Doris, who had also entered with her, was shocked at the horrifying scene. Both ladies were in a state of shock, but they soon called the other neighbors for help. Then, they finally contacted the Denver Police Department to report the murderer. Captain James E. Childers, along with 3 patrol cars, arrived on the scene within a few minutes. They first took a look around the property to see if there were any clues that could help them find the murderer. Philip Peters had been struck 37 times with a blunt weapon, leaving blood splattered on the walls of the kitchen, living room, and bedroom where his body lay. Many of his wounds were lacerations to his forearms, indicating that he defended himself against an attacker as best he could. There was a shattered walking stick on the floor near the body, indicating that he had attempted to fight back. During the search, as authorities attempted to piece together a picture of the crime, they got rather perplexed due to a lack of information, particularly on the house's entry points. The neighbors were only able to enter the house through the back door, as all other windows and doors were shut and showed no signs of forced entry. A small 8 by 15-inch fault panel was found in a closet in the back wall of an upstairs storage room, but it couldn't be opened, even though they tried many times. They did find this suspicious initially, but they thought it was too small for anyone to go through, so they ended up dismissing it eventually. In the kitchen, detectives discovered parts of a handgun on the floor and what seems to be an out-of-place cast iron stove shaker. Assuming that the iron poker was the primary murder weapon, it was submitted to a laboratory for fingerprint analysis and any other possible forensic evidence it may have concealed. The cops initially suspected the motive to be robbery, but when they found $208 in unpaid profits and $24 in cash in the bedroom, they began to doubt this theory. Over the next few days, they found about $400 all around the house, making robbery even less plausible. Instead, they thought it might have been a revenge killing. But neighbors told the police that the Peters had no enemies and were well-liked and respected in the community after living there for so long. Captain James E. Childers and his team were in charge of the investigation. and they were under pressure to find answers quickly. By October 20th, the police had already arrested one suspect and were questioning others, but none of them seemed to be a viable culprit. The first suspect was arrested by Weld County Sheriff Gus Anderson. The man had a record of robbery and breaking and entering. At the time, he had suddenly been seen wearing a high-quality dark blue coat that stood out from the rest of his clothing. But when detectives checked if Peter's jacket collection had something similar to it, they realized it didn't. The man in custody was 64 years old, short, and considered too feeble to have violently attacked Peters. Finally, he was released. The other two suspects were similar, too. One of them was a man who went door to door in North Denver begging for money. That man was never seen again after the day of the murder. So, the police thought he was just a beggar who had left. The stove shaker was returned from the lab and it had no fingerprints on it. But small spots of blood confirmed to the authorities that it was the murder weapon. In many ways, this investigation took one step forward and two steps back. Police had disproved the robbery theory, but on the other hand, they now had no suspects. The authorities said in a press release that the killer took time to wash his hands and clean the murder weapon, so he had definitely had enough time to rob the house. If he really wanted to rob Peters, they wouldn't have found so much cash and other possessions still in the house. The motive behind the killing still confused them. The investigation had halted by spring. Despite an extensive investigation, the police had no leads. After Mrs. Peters returned from the hospital, things began to escalate. On the 1st of February 1942, Helen Peters returns to West Moncrief Place. She was alone in her 40-year-old home. Her future was uncertain at 68 years old and recovering from a fractured hip. So she hired two nurses to help her around the house. She was helped by Mrs. Edith Clark and Mrs. Hattie Johnson. Helen fell again a few weeks later and was hospitalized yet again with a broken hip. She returned home at the end of April, and the two nurses helped her around the house. Edith was the first one who reported suspicious things happening inside the house. She heard noises in the walls, and what she swore were faint footsteps in vacant rooms. Newspapers were missing from the front porch that she had seen earlier, and Mrs. Peters' food trays were moved or rearranged when she maintained she hadn't touched them. Edith wasn't alone in noticing oddities. Mrs. Peters was hard of hearing, but Hattie Johnson, who had nighttime fright, could hear disturbances. Both nurses heard strange sounds on the regular. Mrs. Peters began to suspect that something was off in her home after learning of the nurses' accusations. One day, Edith Clark contacted the police after seeing a person in the stairwell. She also heard tapping sounds coming from over there. She had heard it previously as well, but had believed it was a woodpecker. But this time, she went into the kitchen and then to the upstairs stairwell door as it slowly opened. She saw a foot and a thin white hand appear at the door. She screamed in fear as the man ran up the stairs. Despite searching the property, the officers found nothing. Two police officers stayed in the house for 48 hours and found no evidence of an intruder. Edith Clark resigned after this incident. Within 2 weeks, Hattie Johnson also departed the house, telling the press she wouldn't stay at a haunted house. In May 1941, Mrs. Peters' son, Philip Jr., visited her and tried to convince her to move to Grand Junction after her nurse's sudden resignations. She moved in with her son and his wife in June 1941. She stopped house utilities and left the home for the police to investigate. 3-3-3-5 West Moncrief Place that had been Peter and Helen Phillips's home for so many years was now empty. But the strange occurrences continued after she left. Neighbors noticed the windows' blinds moving. They were lowered and opened at times during the day. Since the house was under investigation in an active murder case, people took notice of strange activities, and police received multiple complaints of a shadow walking around at night. Police eagerly responded to calls but found just vacant rooms. 2 officers stood guard outside the house for 5 days, but it was uneventful. The stakeout ended on the 5th day, and they returned to the station with no new information. With Mrs. Peters gone, the patrol checked the property every day, sometimes following up on reports of movement in the windows and sometimes merely as a matter of habit. The press quickly picked up on the house's peculiar happenings and began referring to the killing as a ghost slaying. The Peters house was now the ghost house of Denver. It stayed in the news for a very long time. The townspeople thought this was just the press making up a headline to sell a story, but the police were investigating a very real mystery. No one had seen or heard the killer. How was Peter slain in a closed house with no forced entry? The investigation was also quickly losing steam as they had no leads and no suspects. On July 30th, 1942, detectives Roy Bloxam and William Jackson were patrolling West Moncrief. They parked in front of the deserted house, as had become customary by this point, and went inside to conduct their routine room searches. This time, however, they both picked up a faint sound coming from upstairs. The two men hurriedly climbed the stairs, ran into the bedroom, and entered the tiny back storage space. A pair of legs were climbing up into a small opening in the back of a closet, giving them just enough of a start to frighten them for a brief second. A pale, malnourished man was hauled out by them after they grabbed the dangling feet. He disliked the sunlight, was the color of a mushroom, and behaved like a spider that scurries for darkness when caught hiding under a stone. He was beetle-browed, wide-eyed, and pale as a ghost. String and rope were all that kept his rotting garments from falling apart. They did not try to fire after seeing the condition he was in. The man identified himself as Matthew Cornish and said he had moved to Denver in 1941 from Tonawanda City in New York, where he had worked as an advertiser. Detective Bloxam and Jackson then took him to the station. He stuck to the story for a few hours, right up until he was fed a cheeseburger with coffee. Then, after giving in, he revealed his real identity to be Theodore Edward Coneys and told the police of two incidents from his life that led to his acquaintance with and subsequent murder of Philip Peters. On November 2, 1882, Theodore Edward Coneys was born in Petersburg, Maynard County, Illinois. His father, Thomas Coneys, a Canadian immigrant, owned and operated a local hardware store. Isabella, Theodore's mother, was a homemaker. They lived happily as a family until Coneys' father died in 1888. It was a huge shock for his mother, who moved to Beloit, Wisconsin with her young child. When Theodore was diagnosed with tuberculosis several years later, his life got even more difficult. He had been an ill youngster for a long time. Scared of losing her only family, his mother, Isabella, spoiled her son. He enjoyed sports and aspired to play baseball, but his mother pushed him towards the softer, less physically demanding career of music. While the neighborhood lad swung bats on the school field, he sat at home, wrapped in his overbearing mother's protective blanket, learning to play the mandolin. The physicians had given him the gloomy prognosis that he would not live to reach his 18th birthday, so he dropped out of high school. Isabella Coneys relocated to Denver, where she worked as a housekeeper, and Theodore resumed his music with a large quantity of money left over from her husband's death. Unfortunately, not long after they arrived, she was duped by a con artist who convinced her to invest her husband's fortune and securities before stealing every last penny. The family was shattered as a result, and Theodore got a part-time job to help put food on the table, but it was a dismal living. Isabella Coneys died in 1911, leaving Theodore both broken and alone. Theodore met Philip and Helen Peters through music. Philip and Theodore were both members of the same mandolin club. The couple noticed his difficulties coping after his mother's death and befriended him, frequently inviting him for dinner and offering him company. One of his friends introduced Theodore to the Denver Gas and Electric Company, where he began as a pipefitter helper and swiftly advanced to the position of pipefitter himself. He and his friend were doing well in this job, but they formulated a plan to become advertising men and quit the pipe-fitting game to start their own firm. Theodore Coney was the company's public face, while his partner was the operations brains. Unfortunately, neither side fared well in their responsibilities, and they quickly went bankrupt. Coney's took off, leaving Denver and traveling across many states, working at various jobs such as insurance and advertising sales. Nonetheless, after battling it out, he eventually began to gradually drift away from society. In 1917, he sought to develop cheap gasoline leases in Texas, but failed again, leading him to become a full-time wanderer and drifter. When he eventually made his way back to Denver in September 1941, he was far from triumphant. He was nothing more than a homeless beggar, and his first stop would be at his old friend's place, the Peters. He hadn't seen them in nearly 30 years, but he knew he could always ask for dinner. After all, they'd been so welcoming to him over the years. In September 1941, Theodore Coneys, who was nearly 59 years old at the time, arrived at 3335 West Moncrief Place just in time to watch Philip Peters leave with a neighbor. He was on his way to the hospital to see his wife. Instead of waiting for him, Theodore decided to swing around to the backyard and attempt the back entrance. As luck would have it, it was unlocked, so he strolled inside and helped himself to some food. He spent some time nosing around the Peters house until, in an upstairs storage room, he discovered a little 8 by 15-inch ply wall panel in the top of a closet that functioned as a trapdoor into a tiny coffin-shaped attic that was 37 inches tall at the apex, 7 feet long and 4 feet wide. Coneys resorted to the narrow crawl space in the rafters instead of leaving. Appeared to be a suitable place to spend the winter, he later told authorities. And this is exactly what he did for several weeks. When Philip was out seeing his wife in the hospital, he would leave the small space in the attic and move around the house. Mrs. Peters' condition was unknown to Coney, but the scenario worked in his favor. Every night he would listen through a hole until he heard Philip snoring, then crawl out and go to the icebox, taking just enough food to not be noticed. He said he'd take it back to his nest, where he discovered fragments of an antique crystal set and a pair of headphones in one of the closets. He repaired it so it worked, and he listened to all of the music from the newscast. He used to go down to the restroom and shave with the older gentleman's razor. Slowly, when Coneys was feeling a bit bored, he thought of doing something funny to entertain himself. He began to follow Philip Peters throughout the home, monitoring his movements and hiding behind doors as he passed for pure enjoyment. On the afternoon of Friday, October 17, 1941, things took a drastic turn when he assumed Peters had gone out to visit his wife in the hospital. Coney slipped out of his cramped living quarters around 4 p.m. and headed to the kitchen to get some food. As it turned out, Peters was simply sleeping, and the noise from the kitchen woke him up, so he went to investigate. When the two men met, they were stunned to see each other. Coney stated that he was afraid of losing his sanctuary. Peters didn't recognize him due to the fact that he had changed dramatically in the last 30 years. Coney's noticed an ancient handgun hanging on the wall and grabbed it, hitting Peter on the head. Peter fell, but he got up and went to the dining room phone. Coney's followed Peter and punched him again when he stated he would call the cops. Peter was looking for the vials in which he has stashed some money. Coney's noticed him unlocking a drawer in the basement bedroom. He says he went in there with the stove shaker and he didn't know how many times he hit him. He just kept punching him, till he stopped moving. After that, he cleansed the iron porker and took some food with him. Then he scurried back to his hiding place rather than running away. 2 hours later, he heard activity downstairs when Mrs. Ross, the neighbor from across the street, discovered Philip Peters' death. Later, on his homemade radio, he listened to the news about the crime. Since Mrs. Peters had trouble hearing, he stayed in the house after she got back, which made life better for him overall. His biggest problem, however, was when she was away after injuring herself again. He was nearly frozen to death because there was no heat in the house, but he still remained in his nest. He liked to go down and peek out of the windows watching the postman pass by. He stated that no one had written to him in the last 25 years. He despised people on the street and would retreat to the attic whenever he saw them. When the townspeople witnessed blinds moving, papers being removed from the porch, or movements in the windows, Theodore Coneys unwittingly became the ghost of the Denver ghost slaying. Most people would have left the house with constant patrols checking the home, but Coneys felt different. He'd been in the attic for about 10 months and did not want to leave. The following day, weird stories of the ghost slayer, who had lived as a spider in the walls, were all over the front pages of the neighborhood newspapers. The press was informed of everything by Captain Childers. Coneys told the police that he was sitting on the little false trapdoor when they first found it inside the home on October 17, 1941, and that he had held it shut with his body weight as they knocked on it before they dismissed it, thinking it was too small for a person to fit through comfortably. Both in his formal statement to the police and in a news interview he gave on August 2, 1942, he continued to offer a very detailed account of his existence in the attic of the Peters. In that attic, it was freezing cold in the dead of winter and excruciatingly hot in the summer, but that was all part of the price he was willing to pay. He had only once left the home throughout the 10 months he had spent living in this cramped attic area, and that was in the middle of the night after Mrs. Peters had departed and the utilities were turned off. He used a toy shovel to gather some snow to fill a bucket with water. He stated that everything would have been okay and Philip Peters would still be alive today if he hadn't been caught robbing the icebox. He was 6 feet tall, but barely weighed 75 pounds when he was taken into custody. Police searched the residence where Conies had been residing after hearing his confession, and one of them reported being knocked out by the foul odor. According to Detective Fred Sarnoff, a guy would need to be a spider to survive up there for very long. In relation to first-degree murder, Theodore Conies entered a not guilty plea. Foster Klein, the court-appointed attorney who represented him, said that while Conies would not contest killing Peters, he sought to avoid the death penalty. This had been demanded by the prosecution from the beginning. But Klein was optimistic because the crime had not been planned and because of Conies' mental state at the time of assault. The actual trial took place over the course of 6 days at the end of October, 1942. This was because Conies was admitted to the hospital with pneumonia on September 21, 1942, and the original trial had to be postponed. Conies got a psychiatric evaluation while he was being held in jail pending trial, and the results showed that he was fit to stand trial. Klein, however, pleaded with the judge to order an impartial investigation to gather proof that might spare him the death penalty. Conies had to undergo a second examination after the request was granted, and the results were provided to the judge. Conies was then referred to see Dr. Leo Tapley. Conies was found once more to be in good enough condition to be tried in court. The county maintained its composure in the courtrooms throughout the trial, which was largely free of drama and theatrics. The jury was given 90 minutes to deliberate before returning its judgment on Halloween in 1942. Conies was given a life sentence at the Colorado State Penitentiary with hard labor, and he escaped the death penalty. After the decision was announced, Conies looked at Foster Klein and said, "I now feel secure. I'll live in a better house than I have in a long time." The Associated Press selected the now officially known Ghost Man murder as Colorado's top news story for 1942 on January 1, 1943. After finding his nest in the attic, Conies earns the nickname the Spider-Man of Denver. Additionally, it took some time for him to lose his reputation as the ghost slayer in the media. In the end, Conies passed away on May 16, 1967, in a prison hospital. He was 84 years old when he passed away, and he was cremated and buried in Mountain Vale Memorial Park in Cannon City, Colorado, in an unmarked grave. Case of Michelle Ling. Snapper Point is an Australian conservation area situated near Fraser Park Beach, close to Catherine Hill Bay, New South Wales. The area surrounding Cape Snapper Point draws adventurous tourists who climb it in search of remarkable photographs, as it comprises entirely of steep, irregular volcanic rocks. On April 24, 2016, at 10:30 a.m., a group of hikers walking at the foot of the promontory noticed a large object floating on the surface of the water. They reported the discovery to law enforcement, and the police arrived at the scene and removed an unidentified package. After examining the findings on shore, they discovered the body of an unknown woman with multiple injuries, suggesting that the victim had been subjected to a brutal assault. She was not identified, but news reports described her as an Asian female between 20 and 30 years old, of average height. 5 years earlier, a major airport in the northern Sichuan province of the People's Republic of China saw off 20-year-old Lung during a torrential downpour. The girl tearfully said goodbye to her beloved mother after the death of her father in 2008. Her mother became the closest person to her. Lung flew from her native China to the distant country of Australia, where she had dreamed of studying since her childhood. 11 hours later, the plane landed in Sydney. It was the first time Lung had made such a long journey alone, but she was determined to achieve her dream, so she easily overcame any difficulties. She was met at the airport by her own aunt and her son, who was only 2 years younger than Lung. The oldest and most populous state in Australia is New South Wales, where 1 in 3 Australians live. It was here that Lung's early years were spent after moving here. Since coming to Australia, Lung has lived happily with her 48-year-old aunt, her young husband Derek Barrett, and her cousin in their camping house. The girl had a private room where she spent almost all of her free time. Lung loved to read and draw, so she would spend hours in her room pursuing her favorite hobbies. For the convenience of living in another country, Lung changed her name to Michelle. Michelle Lung enrolled at the University of Technology in Sydney, where she successfully studied economics and hospitality management. Michelle was very intelligent and motivated. She was not afraid of anything new and easily made new acquaintances. Like many girls of her age, she often posted photos on social networks, where she drank cocktails with friends, as well as pictures of her extreme adventures to dangerous natural places. Michelle was an adventurous person who could easily travel to Hobart for a vacation and regularly took day trips around New South Wales. In recent weeks, she posted videos from West Head Lookout near Sydney Harbour, photos from Resolute Beach north of the city, from Coringui Chase National Park, and from Jervis Bay on the south coast. On June 13, 2013, she visited Snapper Point, where she fearlessly photographed herself on the edge of a cliff and posted this striking photo to her Instagram account. Excelled in her studies, made new friends, and found a part-time job. Desiring to organize her personal life, Michelle communicated regularly with men on dating sites and went on trial dates. The woman led an active and busy life, attending classes during the day and then rushing to work on her weekends. She made sure to meet friends and visit unusual places. On April 21, 2016, Michelle met up with a friend at the mall. They had lunch together, did some shopping, and then Michelle boarded a train at the train station. She got off at Central Station around 4:30 in the afternoon and was never seen again. 2 days later, Derek went to the train station to meet his wife, who had returned from a business trip. Aunt Michelle asked Derek about his niece, and he said he had not seen her in 2 days. Derek Barrett had been unemployed for a long time, so he often stayed up late at the computer and woke up only in the afternoon, so it was obvious that he might not have seen Michelle. But the situation was such that nobody had seen Michelle since April 22nd, and her phone was switched off. Having called all of Michelle's acquaintances and friends, the aunt became even more worried. She inspected the girl's room, but it was in perfect order as usual. After going through the girl's laptop, the family concluded that Michelle had not returned from her date, and perhaps something had happened to her. Her absence was quite unusual, as she was in regular contact with friends and family members living in China and Australia. The next day, Michelle's aunt and her husband Derek went to the police station and filed a missing persons report. They also reported Michelle Lung's disappearance to the Chinese embassy on April 24, 2016. The body of an unidentified woman, wrapped in a plastic bag, was discovered by a group of tourists at Snapper Point. While Michelle's relatives in China and Australia were searching for her, local news channels reported the finding of the woman's body. The compiled sketch of the victim made it clear that it was Michelle. It took the police 3 days to identify her after they made a sketch of her. From that point on, Michelle Lung was officially listed as a missing person, and an investigation was launched. After interviewing Michelle's close relatives who were living with her, the initial theory was that she had been attacked by an unknown person with whom she had planned to meet that day. CCTV footage tracked the girl's movements on the day she went missing. But the surveillance cameras and footage from a short train journey showed that Michelle was alone. According to her friends, she had no plans to meet anyone that day and was in a rush to get home. Reviewing social networks and correspondence of the girl did not confirm the presence of a young man with whom she could have met. The version about a secret stranger who could have committed the crime was not confirmed. The results of the forensic examination confirmed that Michelle's body had sustained multiple injuries, and she had most likely tried to fight off her attacker, resulting in multiple stab wounds. Police Chief Inspector Gary Jubilin said the interpretation of the situation is that Michelle was brutally assaulted before her death, but she was spotted on her way home and did not go out anywhere else. so the perpetrator must have attacked her in that area. The inspector also noted that most likely the perpetrator had deliberately chosen a very secluded area of such a beautiful place, as the body was found in an area frequented by tourists and fishermen, but the place was somewhat isolated. Forensic analysis indicated that Michelle Ling's body had been in the water for no more than 48 hours, and likely much less, suggesting the body had been dumped quite recently. The chief inspector of police stated that although the location where the body was found was distant from the national park entrance, there was a parking lot near the tourist attraction, implying the body may have been transported there by car. Homicide detectives studied CCTV and traffic camera footage to determine Michelle Ling's last known movements. They continued to contact her family members, friends, and co-workers to gather additional information. In addition to the search efforts, interviews were conducted with relatives and acquaintances in the hope of reconstructing a detailed picture of the event and establishing a full understanding of the relationships within the family where Michelle lived. Police Inspector Gary Jubilin stated with certainty that based on the gathered information, Michelle was a very responsible person who always kept in touch with her family and informed them of her whereabouts. Therefore, there were serious concerns when she suddenly disappeared. However, for 2 days, her family either did not notice she was missing or chose to ignore it. Police called Derek Barrett in for questioning as the last person to see Michelle alive. Investigators were skeptical of his accounts of nightlife and long daytime naps, so he was re-interviewed. The investigators began asking questions about his relationship with Michelle and asked him to remember the last time he had seen her. Unable to withstand the pressure of the interrogation, Derek refused to answer the question and demanded a lawyer. Such strange and uncertain behavior led to a number of doubts, and Derek was arrested as a suspect. However, the arrest had grounds, as on the eve of the interrogation, investigators checked his cell phone signal and found that he was in the same area where Michelle's body was found on April 24th. Additionally, when police obtained surveillance footage from a parking lot, it captured a car matching the description of Derek Barrett's vehicle in the early morning hours of April 24th. Leaving no doubt that he was there. Derek denied and claimed to the last that it was just a coincidence and the car was not his. But the footage was clear enough to prove his presence in the parking lot. Police have charged a 27-year-old man in the death of 25-year-old Michelle Ling. Her naked body with multiple stab wounds was found in a blowhole on the Central Coast, New South Wales. The news of the arrest and charge against Derek has left Michelle's entire family in shock. Police spoke to Michelle's mother, who was devastated by the news of her daughter's death. She rushed to Sydney to see the site of her only daughter's dream and death, but the woman was still unable to comprehend her daughter's passing. Derek Barrett, aged 27, who was married to Michelle Ling's aunt, was charged with the 25-year-old student's murder. This occurred after the police released CCTV footage that captured her last shopping trip in the central business district of Sydney on April 21st. As well as her journey back home. The footage shows her shopping at a mall on Pitt Street before boarding a train at St. James Station to travel to Erskine Park, located in the southwest of Sydney. The police believe that Michelle returned to her family home in Erskine Park in the afternoon, where she lived with her uncle, aunt, and cousin, and was presumably murdered there. The autopsy revealed that Michelle tried to fight off her attacker and was stabbed several times in defense, stabbing her more than 30 times in total. CCTV footage is believed to have captured a vehicle entering Lake Monmouth National Park at around 7 a.m. on April 24th, and police claim Michelle Ling's body was inside the vehicle. Despite Derek Barrett being detained and charged, the investigation continued and gradually other details of Michelle Ling's final moments surfaced. Based on these, further charges were laid, including 5 counts of indecent assault, 2 counts of installing a hidden camera, and murder. The investigation revealed that the suspect had an abnormal sexual interest in his wife's young niece. When Derek Barrett's cell phone was seized and handed over to experts for analysis and recovery of previously deleted data, the files found on the phone left no doubt that he was not only involved in Michelle's death, but also had an unhealthy interest in her. It turned out that Derek had installed a hidden camera in the shared bathroom, hidden behind toiletry items, and regularly reviewed the recordings. The phone also contained images taken just before Michelle's death. Following these images, It became clear that Michelle had returned home on April 21st around 5 p.m., and around midnight she sent her last text message from her phone, after which she could not be contacted. Late at night, Derek Barrett began to execute his malicious plan. He entered Michelle's room again while she was asleep to carry out his customary pattern of assault and gratification. But the girl woke up and Derek attacked her. He bound her and covered her mouth with duct tape to keep her silent. The deviant kept her tied to the bed for 2 days and intermittently abused her, as evident from the photographs on his phone. Investigators found Michelle bound naked, and with a look of horror on her face, lying on the bed. However, in these photos, Michelle did not yet have the injuries that led to her death. Derek's last picture of her was taken around 8 a.m. on April 23rd, and at that time Michelle was still alive. During the day of April 23rd, Derek steps and Derek came home twice and did not hear any sounds from Michelle. Derek was taking a shower at the time. Surveillance cameras showed that Derek left the apartment 4 times to take out the trash. Presumably by this time, Michelle was already dead. Derek had showered and washed off any traces of blood, and then thoroughly cleaned the house, hiding evidence of the crime and Michelle's disappearance. On April 24th at 7 a.m., Derek drove to Snapper Point. On the way, he stopped at a gas station where he bought drinks and filled his car with gasoline. That's where he was caught on CCTV cameras. Upon arriving at Snapper Point, he disposed of Michelle's body and took some pictures around 9 a.m. Afterwards, Derek visited his parents, who noticed nothing unusual in his behavior, and then returned home to await his wife's return with absolute equanimity. He repeatedly claimed that he had not seen Michelle and that the girl had not returned home, and cynically accompanied his wife to the police station to file a missing persons report. On June 29, 2016, the first court hearing was held. Barrett's lawyer, Bill Whitby, told the local court that Barrett was pleading not guilty and that he was as shocked and upset by Michelle's death as the rest of the family. Michelle Lang's friends and family were present in the packed courtroom, but Derek Barrett did not need to attend in person. He appeared later via video link. The fact is that the day before, the defendant reported that he did not remember much in the hours before he killed Michelle Lang because he had taken illegal drugs. He also told the court that he had only vague memories of the 2-hour trip to Snapper Point, where he threw Michelle Lang's body off the cliff. Before attending the court hearing, Derek Barrett was examined by a psychologist. However, forensic psychologist Dr. Richard First disputed the defendant's claims of memory loss. He testified and found Derek Barrett mentally fit to be punished to the full extent of his sentence. Dr. First testified that the drugs the suspect was taking did not cause memory loss and that all of his actions, from the murder to the disposal of the body, were clear and purposeful. Respected forensic psychiatrist Dr. Richard First also stated that Derek Barrett's intelligence, concentration, and memory were within the normal range. He did not believe Barrett's claims of memory loss and said the number of stab wounds indicated sadistic tendencies rather than memory lapses or acting on emotions. The psychologist also rejected Derek Barrett's claim that he did not feel sexually attracted to the victim. Dr. Richard First also told the court that the accused feigned amnesia to reduce his responsibility for the crime, after he claimed he could not remember the period when he apprehended and killed Michelle Lang. Speaking at the trial, Derek Barrett attempted to justify his crime by claiming he was addicted to illegal drugs. However, this assertion was refuted by Dr. Richard First, who pointed out that Derek's claim was self-contradictory as it was evident that the suspect had gained weight during that time period. Judge Wilson stated that in his 30-year career as a criminal defense attorney, he had never encountered an obese, substance-dependent individual. Regrettably, there was nothing genuine about Derek Barrett's behavior in the courtroom. In Sydney, Derek Barrett's demeanor in court gave the impression of a psychopath. His crime was not the result of a drunken night, poor life choices, or childhood abuse. In August, at a retrial hearing, Derek Barrett pleaded guilty to murdering and kidnapping Michelle Lang, as well as twice sneaking into her room while she slept and making videos. He also admitted taking 19 explicit photos of Michelle Lang shortly before her death. Barrett said he could not remember the 48-hour period during which he killed the girl, including cleaning up the crime scene and dumping her body because he was under the influence of illegal substances. He said his only memories were of an argument, blood in the bathroom, and the terrified face of his niece screaming at him. However, Judge Wilson said she did not believe Derek Barrett was telling the truth about his memory loss, nor did she believe he was truly sorry for what he had done. The Lang family consoled each other while Derek Barrett wiped away tears, telling them, "I deserve to live. This should never have happened." Passing sentence, Judge Helen Wilson condemned Derek Barrett's actions as depraved and sadistic, committed by a person in a position of trust. The judge detailed Barrett's disturbing fantasies and actions in court, making it clear that he had failed to fool anyone. Although the events were deeply etched in his mind, Barrett claimed they were merely vague memories. During the court sessions, Barrett showed no emotion and repeatedly spoke the victim's name. Chief Inspector Gary Jublin of the NSW Police Homicide Unit stated that the crime was horrific and senseless, and while justice was served, there was no joy in such a case. Judge Wilson sentenced 28-year-old Barrett to 34 years and 6 months in prison, with a maximum term of 46 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2050. Barrett displayed no emotional reaction when sentenced. Michelle's mother, Mrs. Zhang, expressed gratitude to the Australian and Chinese communities for their support during her time of immense grief. She also thanked the NSW police, including Detective Inspector Jublin, for their investigation into her daughter's death. A fund has been established to cover the costs of Miss Lang's funeral and to provide support for her mother when she returns to China. However, Michelle Lung's tragic story did not end there. For years after the crime, an unexpected event occurred. A woman visiting her elderly, dementia-affected mother found an unknown USB device in the mother's hands. Upon examination, the device contained disturbing videos and photos of Michelle Lung's abuse shortly before her murder. The police were able to match the photos to those that Derek Barrett had deleted from his phone, in an attempt to conceal his crimes. In 2020, Barrett was charged with additional sex offenses based on this new evidence. Prosecutor Hugh Baker told the court that the elderly woman had no connection to Barrett, and there was no explanation for how the USB drive ended up in her possession. The horrifying and depraved secret, discovered by chance, led to Barrett receiving additional years of punishment to his already lengthy sentence. Friends and acquaintances commemorated Michelle Lung on Chinese and Australian social media. This tragic story underscores the need to address the underlying factors that can contribute to such crimes, such as idleness, lack of purpose, and indifference. Cherishing life and being mindful of each day is crucial, as we can never predict which day will be our last. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.